Hi, everybody, it's Chris here, and welcome to Beyond the Macro Recorder, the video series for people who've recorded a few macros, felt the power of VBA, and are now ready to move on to more powerful stuff. Over the course of the next 4 videos, we're going to learn about position control in VBA, we're going to learn about loops, conditional statements, and how to trigger macros using buttons in more sophisticated ways. These 4 key skills are what you need to get over this little hump, take your Excel VBA to the next level. That's what we're going to do. And this is the Beyond the Macro Recorder series of 4 videos. Now, there's a download link in the video description below. You can download the Excel files and view some bonus content there. You've got to put your email in. It's absolutely free. I'll send you a promotional email about our fantastic member community. You can have a look at that and just unsubscribe if you don't want to hear from us anymore. So with that said, let's get into the download file, and we've got our videos itemized here. We've got the main themes and the learning outcomes. So what are we doing here? We're sorting a data set that changes in size. So let's get into the VBA editor and into module 1, and we can see straight away we've got some code here. So in the introductory video in the series, I recorded this code. Look at the playlist for this series, which is in the pinned comment below this video, if you'd like to view that video. So we're talking about sorting a data set. This is the code we've got. So recorded code. What's the first thing we want to do if we want to move beyond the macro recorder and to the next level? Well, we've got to interrogate the code. Interrogate the code. What does that mean? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? An interrogation. We've got to go through the code line by line, try to get a sense of what the code's doing, and crucially, identify the important parts in the code that we might want to manipulate. And VBA is quite an intuitive language, so you can often understand it fairly easily. For example, this line of code, clearly we're selecting something, and this line of code, we're also selecting something. So what's it doing? Well, here it says XL to right and XL down. This is actually the VBA for selecting data to the end of the contiguous range. Control Shift right and Control Shift down. Those actions translated into VBA, that's what they look like. So that's what we want to do. It's a process of translation. Now, these 2 lines of code, we don't actually need them for the routine, but they are interesting. We're going to come back to them later in this video because they have some beautiful dynamic syntax that we're going to use. Now, this line of code, what might it do? Well, it's about clearing the sort field. So Excel seems to save the sort settings for the worksheet. So let's just retain this line of code because we kind of want to reset those sort settings when we do our sort. Now, this big chunk of code is really where it gets interesting. It can look intimidating, can't it? But don't worry, only a few bits of this syntax actually matter to us. So let's go ahead, interrogate the code, and actually identify them. So the sort key here, you see it says add to and key. I'm not sure why it says 2 and not 1. Let's just note that mentally. That might be something to come back to later. But this is the column in the spreadsheet that Excel is using to sort the data. It's the sort key. Column B, what does that mean in a practical sense? Let's go back to column B here. Well, in the first introductory video, we sorted by the home team. Remember, the playlist is in the pinned comment below this video. You can view all the videos in the series. We sorted by the home team in column B. In future videos in this series, we're going to look at sorting by other columns using VBA. So that's what it's saying. Now, that's going to be interesting to us for a couple of reasons. We want to control the sort key, the sort column, but also because what do we have here? And this is certainly something to take notes on. We've got what we'd call a hard coded value, a hard coded value. What does that mean? We've actually got letters and numbers. We've got cell references in the VBA editor. They're hard coded. They're not going to change. Why is that a problem for us? Well, it's a problem because the first thing we're doing in this series is sorting a data set that changes in size. All data sets out there these days are changing in size. So our code, it shouldn't be static. It shouldn't be hard coded. It should be what we call dynamic code. Now, dynamic code can handle a changing data set. So this is really interesting to us. How do we make this line of code dynamic? In the same way, looking down the code, we've got a hard-coded reference here. So when you're working with VBA, always look out for these hard-coded references. Are they going to cause a problem? Could we replace them with something more dynamic? Again, what does this mean? Set range, range. This is the range of data that we're going to sort. You can see it says column B to column J. The sort key is just a single column. The set range, the sort range is going to be likely to be more than one column. And in this case, it's column B to column J. Let's cross-reference that, if you like, against the spreadsheet, and we can see our data. Yes, it's from column B to column J. So suddenly we've potentially got control of the data set that we're sorting in terms of the columns represented by the letters and in terms of the rows represented by the numbers there. So our specific challenge in this video is this value here, 386. If we add more data to the file, that value is going to increase. It might be 400, 800, 80,000, who knows? So we want our code to be dynamic, to respond to those changes in the spreadsheet. So how can we change this number to whatever number of rows is in the spreadsheet? This is what we're going to do in the first video. Let's go to our learning outcomes quickly. Just orientate ourselves here. We're going to try to do 4 things in this video. So the first thing is to declare a variable in Excel VBA. So you're saying, Chris, whoa, what's a variable? Well, it's one of many things in Excel and Excel VBA that isn't named in an informative way. A variable is simply a place to store some information. It's like a little drawer or a little shelf in a cupboard, and that's the way Excel organizes its memory. We say to Excel, we need a little space, and we're going to specify the size of the space in a second. We need a little space in your memory to store some information that's going to help us accomplish something in this code. Now you'll notice I commented out this code just by hitting the inverted comma there. Anything that's commented out that's in green, Excel's going to ignore. So VBA will not try to execute these lines of code. Annotations or comments are very useful for us to understand what the code's doing. So what about this piece of syntax here? Let's focus specifically on this piece of syntax. This is going to go to the end of the range. So this is critical for giving us that dynamic quality. That's coming in a second, but first we need to declare our variable. So have you ever seen this in Excel VBA? If you're recording macros, you won't have seen this because when you record a macro, Excel doesn't declare any variables. So dim, we're saying to Excel, listen, we want to declare a variable. We have to give the variable a name, and it should be an informative name. I'm going to say last underscore row. So the name of the variable gives us a clue as to what the variable is. I don't recommend using letters to describe variables because it's not informative. And once you have multiple variables, you're going to lose track. What did that variable do again? So by using an informative name, we can avoid that. In last row, and we're going to say integer in this case. So the integer is the variable type, and there's different types of variables. There's string variables that work with text. Integer works with numbers. So we're saying to Excel, we want to store a number in this little space in your memory. What specifically do we want to store? So here we're going to use the A equals B concept, last row equals. So last row equals, we're going to try to assign a value to this variable. That value is going to be the last row in the data set. So how do we get the last row in the data set? Okay, let's go ahead and do it. I want the sheet name here. So the name of the sheet is data 1. We're going to use that name, writing the code organically, of course. We're going to say sheets data 1. So we're saying to Excel, we want you to do something on the data 1 sheet. Now, just notice, I'm not selecting the sheet. I haven't said sheets data 1.select. That's because we're using what we call a remote coding approach. We're not actually selecting the sheet. We're just saying to Excel, go and do something to that sheet in a remote way. That's what we're trying to move towards. So sheets data 1. Now we're going to specify the top of this data set. So we've got B7 here, and we're going to be a bit geeky about this. We're going to go ahead and use a named range. So select B6. Let's go for B6. select B6, and then click in the top left. We're going to call this cell data start. So I clicked in the top left, typed in data start. Now you have to hit enter. You have to hit enter. Now that cell has a name. When I select that cell, I can see in the top left, it has a name there. We want to confirm that name using the name manager. Where's the name manager in Excel? We go to formulas and name manager, and you can see data start there. Now, if you don't see data start, you can go to new and then use this dialog box to specify that B6 should be called data start. And that's data start with an underscore, of course. Why do we need a named range here? Well, if someone were to add rows to this spreadsheet, just going to go ahead and add a few rows, you can see suddenly B9 is now the beginning of the data set. But because we've given it a named range, it's genius. So even if people add rows, the code is still going to work. I'm going to hit Control Z here just to get rid of those rows. And now we're back on cell D6. So that's the power of the named range. It can help us handle at least minor changes to the spreadsheet. So I'm now going to reference that named range, data start, being very careful, steady, systematic. The spelling has to be 100% accurate. If the spelling isn't 100% accurate, you will get some kind of error, and we'll encounter those in the series. We're not too worried about those. So sheets data one dot range data start, and then here's the power of a dynamic piece of VBA. Can you remember this code up here? I referenced at the beginning that this code is going to be fun. We're going to take this bit, dot end xldown, Control V here, and then we're going to say dot row at the ends. Okay. Right, what's wrong with this syntax? Excel's saying something's wrong. I think we've got two brackets there. Do we need two brackets? No, we don't. Okay, so that's how I build VBA. I don't get too worried about getting it right first time. I do it in a kind of interactive way with the VBA editor. Is this okay? Is there an error message? If there's not, then we're good to go. It's kind of a conversation, if you like, with the VBA editor. So this is an incredibly powerful line of code. Now we need to get into testing. Yeah, we've put in a line of code. We want to test it straight away to see, is this going to work? So we're going to go to debug and step into, and we're going to do what's called stepping through the code. Yes, Excel VBA can run the code line by line, one line at a time, and we can look in Excel VBA and understand what's going on. We can look in the spreadsheet rather and understand what's going on. That interaction between the VBA editor and the spreadsheet, they're having a conversation. You're the translator. That's our role as programmers. I'm going to hit the F8 key on the Windows PC. That's going to jump to the next line of code. You can also go to debug and just keep hitting step into. When the line of code is highlighted, that means it hasn't yet been executed. Remember, all Excel is going to do is go down the code, executing it line by line. If it's highlighted, it hasn't yet been executed. So it's exciting for us because we can hit F8 now. Excel's executed that line of code, and we can now try to understand experimentation, testing, play. We can understand, what's that done to the spreadsheet? Can we tweak something to get the result we want? These are all the skills that are going to help you move beyond the macro recorder. Now just take a moment to hover the cursor over that last row variable. We want to confirm that there's a value in the last row variable there, and we can see it. The value is 386. Okay. That in itself is kind of interesting, but not doing anything yet for us. And let's take a moment to just encounter an error that you might possibly get, and just talk about how you might respond to error messages. I'm going to hit the F5 key to run the macro. This is a very common error message, 1004. This error message, it usually means I can't find the sheet that you want me to look at, or I can't find the named range that you want me to look at. In other words, we've made a spelling error somewhere in the sheet name or the named range naming. We can hit debug and we can see the line of code that's problematic for VBA. And in this case, of course, data start, that wasn't accurate. We've got to put that underscore in. Now I'm going to hit the F8 key. You can go to debug and step into, of course, and just confirm that line of code is now okay. So last row is 386 here. We now want to confirm that we've got that dynamic quality. If the data set changes in size, are we going to pick up those additional rows? So what I'm going to do is take the data from data 2, control shift right, control shift down, control C, and then back to data 1. I'm going to go control and down arrow on the Windows PC. You can just scroll to the bottom of the data set if you want to. And then I'm going to go control V here on the Windows PC. You can right click and paste in. All I'm doing there is pasting in the data. Now I can now see we've got additional data in. So we're simulating what you probably want to do in your day-to-day work. Yeah. You want to change the size of that data set. Our Excel VBA has got to be dynamic. It's got to respond to that change. That helps us move beyond the macro recorder. So what are we expecting to happen now? Let's do an experiment. We've got some code. We're expecting this to happen. Let's run through the code. Let's see if it happens. This is a key skill you're going to have to develop to move beyond the macro recorder. Hitting the F8 key on the Windows PC. Then we've got last row. What have we got? Last row is now 766. So fantastic stuff. That's a big breakthrough for us because we've managed to build dynamic quality into this code. And in a second, we're going to see how we can incorporate this last row variable into the sort range and into the whole data set range to make this code dynamic. But let's deal with one issue that you might have, because you might say, well, Chris, my code, it has empty rows. And this is something we experience all the time in our data sets. They're not perfect, not always clean. I'm just going to clear this row. I'm going to hit the delete key. And once again, let's have an experiment. Let's understand, what does that do to the code? So we're just in our safe space. We're just playing and we're learning. Hitting the F8 key, F8 one more time. Stop the video. What's the value of last row going to be now? .end xldown .row goes to the next empty row. So what's the value going to be? Stop the video. See if you can work it out. Hovering over last row, it's now 15. So what we've established is it's problematic if we have empty rows in our data. How are we going to deal with that? Well, you might be lucky. You might be able to say, Chris, I don't have any empty rows. I'm good to go. Fantastic. You can skip ahead in this video. But we're going to look at an alternative approach, which is going to work even if you have empty rows in your data. And this is the approach that I actually use on my project. So the concept is, rather than working from the top down, we're going to work from the bottom up. And this allows us to eliminate the problem of the empty rows. So conceptually, what we're doing, control and down arrow takes me to the bottom of the spreadsheet. We're saying to Excel, start at the bottom, go up, and tell me the number of the first row you get to. Can you see how it doesn't matter how many empty rows we've got in the data set now, because we're working from the bottom up? How about that? For a powerful line of code, it's going to allow you to get out of the macro recorder, I'm sure. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's go ahead and copy this line of code. I'm going to go Control C and Control V, because it's a similar thing that we want to do, isn't it? I'm going to comment out this line of code. I'm saying to Excel, just ignore this line of code now. We're going to go for some slightly different syntax here. So I'm going to say to Excel, go to the bottom of the spreadsheet. There's different ways to do that. I recommend you use the dot cells referencing technique. So two main referencing techniques for working with the spreadsheet. One is just to use the sheet references. The dot cells technique allows us to use numbers, and it allows us to refer to columns using numbers. So ABC would be column 1, 2, 3. I love the simplicity of that. Now, what we're going to say to VBA is rows.count here. So what does that mean? That means the number of rows in the spreadsheet. So that should take us to the bottom of the spreadsheet. So with dot cells, it's the row number first and then the column number. What column number do we want to use? Well, we can be pretty sure. I'm going to make an assumption here, and you might have to do something different if columns are likely to be added to the spreadsheet. I'm going to make the assumption that's not going to happen. So B, which is column 1, it's column 2. And we're going to say, we're just going to say dot row here. So once again, from what we've done in this session so far, could you stop the video and work out what value is going to go into the last row variable? I'm trying to work out myself here. Let's see what happens. Doesn't really matter, does it? It's just play, experimentation. We're just building up our understanding of VBA. The F8 key one more time, and we do have an overflow error here. So what's happened there? Well, what's happened is the integer variable has a maximum limit. The maximum limit is about 34,000, I believe. And we can see in the spreadsheet how many rows do we have? Well, we've got about over 1,000,000 rows, 1,048,000 rows to be precise. Okay, so we're going to change the variable type to a long variable. Remember, variables just allow Excel to organize its memory and allow us to store values there. We've changed it to a long variable, so there's no limit really in terms of the number that we can put into this variable. That should avoid that overflow error that we saw previously. So we've changed that variable there. And now we're hitting the F8 key. We can see last row, it says 1,048,576. The last row number in the spreadsheet. That's because Excel's gone to the bottom of the spreadsheet. You can see if you hover over rows.count, Excel is showing us the value that it understands there, and it's told us the row number. So it doesn't look useful, but we're tantalizingly close to getting this beautiful dynamic functionality working. We're going to delete .row. What do we need to do now to this syntax to get what we need? Stop the video, see if you can do it yourself. We're going to go .ends. Previously, we said xldown. So what might we say this time? We're working from the bottom and we're going up, .end xlup, and we're going to say .end xlup .row. How about that? And I can see Excel's accepted it as syntax that, works. We don't have any error message there. I'm going to hit the F8 key. Remember, you can also go to debug and step into to allow you to step through the code. Hit the F8 key and we can see last row is now 766. But don't believe it first time. Let's go ahead and prove that. I'm going to prove that. I'm just going to take a few rows off the bottom here. So I'm going to say Alt-HDR on the Windows PC. You can just right click and delete those rows. So the last row is now 762. Have we achieved that dynamic quality? If we have, when we step through the code this time, what value should be held in this last row variable? Let's go ahead. Last row, 762. Perfect. And if I was doing this on a real world project, I would just convince myself I'd go and test that maybe 3 or 4 times, build confidence in what's going on there. Okay, so the dynamic quality is there, but we haven't done anything yet, have we? So maybe stop the video and think, what parts of the code are we going to have to change to incorporate this dynamic quality? Well, what we're going to have to do, just to talk about the concept, is what we call concatenation. What we call concatenation. So concatenation, we can see here, join together text and numbers in a string variable. So concatenate means to join together. This idea of the last row on its own is just a number. So we need to join it together with some text, join it together with some text to make a meaningful cell reference. The way I recommend you do this is we want a place to store that information. What does that mean? Yes, we need a new variable here. So we're going to say dim. I'm going to say data address. I'm going to use a string variable here. Would be possible with a range variable. Personally, I prefer string. We won't go into that full discussion now. Effectively, these values here, we want to get into that variable using our last row variable, which we know holds the number of rows. How are we going to do that? We're going to have to use this concept of concatenation. So we want to get a value into the variable. So once again, it's an A equals B construct, just as we did with the last row variable. But what's it going to look like? Well, let's make this a little bit easier. And let's go ahead and take this as a starting point. So you're saying, but Chris, that's hard coded. Absolutely. But this is simplifying things just a little bit for us. It gives us a starting point. We can then tweak that to get it working. So this is what I recommend you do. Okay. So we're going to assume the data starts on B7 just for simplicity here. And once again, that might be problematic if you're adding rows and columns to your data. I'm going to make the assumption that we're starting on B7. If this was a real world project, I'd write that assumption down. I'd have a sheet in the file called assumptions, and I write the assumption down there. Okay, So B7 is okay. And then we know generally from cell referencing that we want to repeat the column letter, just like we've done here. But what do we want to change? We want to change this value here. So how do we do that? Is it coming together? We use the idea of concatenation. So we introduce the ampersand here, the and sign. And all that is doing is joining together two pieces of text into a longer text string that Excel can understand, in this case, as an address in the spreadsheet. So what all we've got to do is put the last row variable in there. How about that? Now I've just seen this is data address. So actually we're going to go to column J here for the data address, and then we're going to have another variable which is going to deal with the sort key. So maybe we'll call that key address. We'll do that in just a second. But first, we've done a little bit of coding, so we want to test it. We always test as we go through. We don't save all the testing to the end if you want to move beyond the macro recorder. Right, hitting the F8 key here. What do we got in here? Fantastic. B7 to J762. I'm going to go and confirm that on the spreadsheet. So data starts in B7. We're making that assumption, and data ends in J762. Fantastic stuff. Seems to be okay. Right. We've got data address now. So what might we want to do? We know we've got this hard-coded value that's controlling the data range that's going to be sorted. So we want to substitute in something to introduce this dynamic quality into the code. How does that work? Well, it can be a little confusing because we're accustomed to seeing speech marks, aren't we, when we refer to a range? But if we're using a variable, in this case, a string variable, to express that idea of the range, we don't need those speech marks because we never use speech marks around variables. So this is what we need, data range. This should allow Excel to sort that data. We're going to see in a second. But we know we've got one more job to do. And if you can, stop the video, try to do this job yourself. We also want to dynamically define this range, which is the sort key range. So what are we actually going to sort this data by? What column? How are we going to do this? We need a place to store this information. I'm going to say key address, key being the idea of a sort key, of course. And what kind of variable is this going to be? Once again, this is going to be a string variable because we're looking to store that text. Okay, so key address. So I'm going steady, systematic here, paying attention to spelling because any one spelling mistake, well, let's go ahead and understand this quickly. We're going to go to the top of the code, just hit the return key. We're going to type in option explicit here. This is a crazy departure. What's happening? Chris is just putting random words at the top of the module. We always use option explicit because it has a number of benefits, but the main benefit is Excel will check for any spelling mistakes in the variables before it runs the routine. Now, just a single spelling mistake like that could cost you hours of time trying to understand an error message. So I always recommend using option explicit. And just to understand what the error would look like, I'm going to run this code, hit the F5 key, and you'll get an error like this. Variable is not defined. So because of option explicit, Excel has gone through, checked all the spellings and said, listen, there's a problem here with your spelling. Let's fix that before we try to move on. So key address, of course, with two S's there. And then what's it going to look like? Well, let's do a little bit of recycling in this case. I know it's going to be something like the data address, isn't it? Broadly speaking, it's the same mechanism we're using. So let's start with that mechanism. It's easier than starting from scratch. And the sort key is going to be a single column. So what do we need to do? Just need to make one change. I'm going to change this to B. You might say, now, if you're really on this, you might be saying, well, Chris, there's more hard-coded values there. Yeah, yes, I agree. In reality, to some extent, some values are going to be hard-coded. And later in the series, we're going to see if we can control the sort column. So if you want to sort by home team, away team, or another column, we're going to try to make that dynamic. So if you did feel that, that's a great observation. That shows that you are moving beyond the macro recorder into serious coding here. Right. So key address, I'm looking through the code. Where's the hard coded value that I want to substitute in for this variable? Let's go key address here. That should do the job. Okay, checking the spelling. I've got the underscore. So what I'm going to do now is step through the code. You could just run the routine straight away, but I'm not feeling quite that confident yet. I'm going to check through the code and there we go. Okay. Did you spot that mistake? That's a great example of option explicit. And you probably spotted that earlier and you're like, Chris, come on, stop talking, get it right. I would feel frustrated too if I had to watch me. Seriously. Okay, we've got data address there, and then we've got key address. So that's an example of option explicit and Excel saying there's a problem with the spelling there. So I'm going to reset. You can see we've gone into break mode because we had an error. That means we've got to reset at the top of the VBA editor, get everything back to normal. Excel's now ready to rock and roll. Hitting the F8 key. Of course, you can also go to debug and step into, are we getting the values into our variable? So the yellow line's here now. So that means these lines of code have run. I can hover over last row 762, hover over data address B7 to J762, and I can hover over key address B7 to B62. Looks okay to me. I'm going to hit the F8 key, work through the rest of the code. Now it's getting exciting. We've got one of our variables actually coming into play here. That seems all right. And then we're working through these. We just had a variable in action again, and that seems to be okay. And we've got to the end of the routine now. Right. So how might we test this? This is going to sort everything by, you can see it's been sorted now. So we've lost that empty row. This is going to sort everything by the first column. Is that actually what we wanted? Okay, I think perhaps we want to say B6 here because is this actually in alphabetical order? Well, BO is after BE in the alphabet. So that doesn't look quite right to me. So we've tested, we've got a result isn't quite right. Do we need to make a yes? Because we've said we've got headers in here, I think we just need to make a slight adjustment here. So I'm going to say B6 and then B6 again. And then I'm going to hit the F5 key, which runs the routine. And we can see now that was a great example of creating a routine. It's 90% there, but it's got a little problem. That's okay. All we've got to do is understand what's happened, facilitate that conversation between VBA and the spreadsheet. We're translators, really, when we're computer programmers. And this looks a lot better. Okay, let's prove it one more time. I'm going to sort this data. This time, let's sort it by away team, say. So I'm going to select away here, hit OK and click sort. And I can see, yeah, we're now sorted by away team. So we should be able to run this code in the VBA editor, come back to the spreadsheet, and we should see that we're sorted again by home team, column B. So I've clicked in the routine, just going to hit play this time, going back to VBA, and I can see we're now sorted by column A. And we've got that dynamic quality. So let's go ahead and prove it. I'm going to go to the third data sheet this time. Just want to copy some data in, Control Shift right, Control Shift down. I'm going to copy the data in here, just Control V should do the job. So what we're expecting now is all of the data up to row 1141 to be sorted, back into VBA, hit the play button, then back into the spreadsheet, and I can see all the data sorted by the value in column B, which is our home team. I'm going to go all the way up the data just to have a visual check of what's going on, and that seems to be good. Okay, so that's it, guys. Moving beyond the macro recorder, let's quickly review our session. What have we done? Well, we've built dynamic position control into a macro recorded by the macro recorder. To do that, we needed to declare a variable. We needed to use this fantastic, powerful construct .end xldown to get to the next empty row. We allocated a value to a variable using our simple A equals B concept. And then we did concatenation to create a range in a string variable. And that facilitated everything. That made the magic happen. In the next video, we're going to look to sort multiple sheets in a file. I will see you there. If the video is already released, you can see it in the pinned comment below this video. You'll be able to access the playlist there. And if you enjoy this kind of video, guys, we've got a whole membership community with around 120 hours of content, with live sessions, with a member forum, with in-person meetups. We've got a whole member of community to support your Excel VBA learning. That's Members Monday. You can find a link for that in the video description below. Thanks for watching, guys. Great job. Great job. If you got to the end of this video, you've had some success. Tell me about your punch the air moments in the comments below. I love to read those. I'll see you in the next video.